iconic poet, author, writer Don Mattera has been described as a fountain of knowledge, a man who used his pen as a sword. Mattera died on Monday at the age of 87. Former Finance Minister Trevor Manuel joined Arts and Culture Minister Thato and other mourners to bid farewell to the prolific author, poet and orator.
Donato Francisco Mattera was born in Westbury in Johannesburg in 1935. His poems and theatre scripts elevated him to a literary icon. Many will remember him as an anti-apartheid activist as he portrayed the injustices of apartheid to the world through his powerful pen. His son remembers him as a peacemaker in the community.
He was a peacemaker. Every gangster knew him. Every person knew him. He loved children. He started a game where they said, "Oh, Don Mattera, hy vang my." Ek sal nie die woord sê nie. But it is still going on today. Don Mattera, as I said earlier, he was a selfless person. He believed in humanity. He believed in Ubuntu.
Mattera's works are global and he's also been conferred with the honorary doctorate. The Don Mattera Legacy Foundation says not only has the Mattera family lost a father, but the nation has lost a legend.
Today we say to him, Don, thank you for your contribution to this world. Thank you for your contribution to this country. It is true that Don has been lauded and honored not only in South Africa but globally for his contribution. And so we say to him, thank you. Don, you've run your race. You have fulfilled your purpose on earth. May you rest in peace.
Sports, Arts and Culture Minister Thato described Mattera as a fountain of knowledge.
His is the larger-than-life legacy of a giant in the realm of literature, as a poet, as a wordsmith, journalist, public speaker, and anti-apartheid activist. And it is particularly in his storytelling that many a time he would sweep many an imagination. Don has been quite exemplary in his determined, deliberate and consistent effort to pass his fountain of knowledge to generations and generations to come.
Mattera was buried according to Islamic rites at West Park Cemetery's Heroes Acre. Offenses Timo, SABC News, Montgomery Park in Johannesburg.
Now, Don, as he was affectionately known amongst his peers, Mattera has been described as a gentle giant who was accessible to all. And to look back at who Don was, we're now joined by some of the people whom he shared his life with or touched in one way or another. In studio here, I'm joined by Kgafela Magogodi, who's a lecturer at Wits University, a spoken poet, writer and musician. And we also have two other guests who are going to be joining us shortly on Zoom. Senior Research Fellow at the Trade Collective, Lebohang, Pheko, and also joining us will be a political activist and writer, Thato Magogodi from Mahikeng in the Northwest. But let's start with you, Mr. Magogodi, and I just wonder, what I'd like more than anything in this conversation is really to get your personal experiences and maybe get a little bit of light on that which we didn't hear yesterday as most of the public stuff was being discussed.
Yeah, can I start by maybe asking us to decolonize these announcements of bereavement? You said he's dead.
Yes.
I don't believe he's dead or he died. I think he transitioned,
right,
because I think we are Africans and we observe different rituals, understanding of life. The body is just part of our existence. So he may have left the body, but the spirit is very much with us. And I believe as we are talking now, he is very much present. He can't be absent in any way. So yes, I mean, Brazinga, what a wonderful person. I met him when I was 18 or so. When I heard about Brazinga, I think at high school, from a high school teacher, his name was Nzime, right? I didn't know much about literature. And one day I think I'd read, because I write what I like, and I started posting Yana. Quotes about not really understanding you're young, really, but you know, you were trying to go somewhere, and I think the teacher notices Renzime, and he says, "Muna Magogodi, muna kiabonore, wadio kumela." I see that you look at books sometimes, so and then he tells me about these very dangerous writers, about Chinua Achebe, about Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and Don Mattera was among those names. And I remember just growing up, even before I met him, I knew about this play called Apartheid Cannot Stand in the Court of History. Right. I mean, even if you didn't see the play, I mean, you can imagine this character, a guy who's drunk and trying to defend apartheid. His name is Apartheid, trying to defend himself, but he doesn't know what is going on, why he's causing us all this botheration. So that is also the humor of Bradon that I love so much. I mean, in moments that I've been with him, he's showered us with humor. He used to love this thing, Kwarana, which, when you're with him.
What struck you straight away when you met him for the first time?
The first time I met him, I was in a classroom at FUBA. At FUBA, FUBA is the Federated Union of Black Arts. We are situated at the time at I think where the Market Theatre is now, at the NAC, where the money is at, or it's supposed to be, and some people get it and some people don't. But anyway, that's not the conversation. The conversation is I met him in that building. He was giving a lecture, and he came, you know, doing his poetry there. And I was just excited to see him, because it's just like, this is the guy I've been, the high school teacher told me about. This is the guy who wrote, you know, Apartheid Cannot Stand in the Court of History. And I was, you know, and he was just running. You know, when Bradon speaks, it's like there's music in the voice. You hear this melody. There's a melodic thing that goes with his address. I was listening, and, you know, I just wanted to participate, and a paper was slipped to me by the teacher to say, you're going to give a vote of thanks. And you know, immediately there I played my game with words, and we struck a friendship. He happened to work in the basement at FUBA, and you know, FUBA was a place which was very interesting. Sipho Sipamla was the principal at the time, who was also a writer, well-known poet, and then Don Mattera was working in the basement. So that's when now I started going for other classes, and you know, I sat with him every day, and he taught me a whole lot of things. I'm introduced to African literature by Don Mattera.
Fascinating. We're going to unpack quite a lot because there's so much to talk about. And I just want to introduce our other guest now from Mahikeng, Thabo Magogodi. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Good evening, sir. They called me Thato Magogodi in Mahikeng.
Yes.
Not Thabo.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. I just wonder what your recollections are, your personal recollections about Bradon.
Well, there's a plethora of them. The first one, if I must tell you, is that I was introduced to Don Mattera through his work, through the guy you just interviewed called Kgafela. He happens to be my brother. He gave me a book called Memory is a Weapon. And the first time I, interacted with that book, I read it from cover to cover. And from there, I fell in love with the guy, and I wanted to meet him personally. And we ultimately connected later on in life when I was at Wits University. And importantly, I had a relationship with him in which I had a particular interest in the language, the colloquial language of Tsotsitaal, and importantly, picked it up and wanted to invest in it. And Bradon, in that sense, became my mentor. I put together that dictionary. With his help, he's managed to even deposit an extract in that dictionary called Eco Perspective, the art of witty, in which he taught us a lot of things. And I think the relationship, blossomed from that vintage point.
What drew you to him straight away when you first met him? What was the magnetism?
the art of witty. Don was a word engineer, and I love words. And, coming from a family of words, poetry, Don would always, touch you. But importantly, it was his Black consciousness teachings which introduced me to politics. I mean, there's a poem that I never forget in which he says, light drops liquid darkness from a wound in the sky. Men look at my blackness as a weed that must die, and here in the dark I feed on bitter bark. My hands bleed of planting thorny seed. Come morning, come glorious light, return justice, heal my broken sight. And now black sunbeams fall on the slope, bringing new light to fulfill my hope. Conscious of thy sacred duty, sweet, sweetly my blackness blooms and becomes my beauty. That is Don Mattera at work, teaching us Black consciousness. And I think it is his poetry that, uncovered all of his teachings about humanism, socialism, Pan-Africanism in the character diverse that he was.
So one of the things that strike me about both of you is that you speak like academics. And I just wonder if there's a certain level of something that's required to fully appreciate his work.
No. I mean, he told me he's my brother, right?
Yes.
So, I think it's just something that has to do with the way we
But I mean,
been accustomed to speaking about stuff. But yes, I mean, there's a sense in which you need to engage with literature at a certain level. But I don't want to even go there because, literature can be also simple. Can be, as he said, Thato. Don was a man of witty language of the streets, and sometimes we need to understand also the sophistication of the language of the street, that it's also the kind of heightened language that we aspire to. Think about the word zaka, it's money. But if you think about it, go Islam, there's a thing called zakat that has to do with money and, giving to the poor. A word like mohacha, for instance, it's like, just basically drawing this hard face. But then when you think about it, the word mohacha comes from a plant called mohacha in Setswana, which has to do with, rituals and what have you. So just to be brief. So there's a sense in which when we speak about he calls it Tsotsitala. I would prefer to call it Iskamto because I think Tsotsitala also limits to a particular character, but Iskamto perhaps makes it a broader field of things. So I appreciated that. I think this is what we love also, language, and we spoke about Don Mattera a lot, and this is, part of, he became part of the family structure, if you like, So in many ways, so that's the thing about how he can touch you. He touches you so much, you even pass it on to your family.
We'll talk a little bit more about the social person just now, because he did a lot of work in these communities, especially with young people, and we'll chat about that. Let's introduce Lebohang Pheko. Often we talk political economics a lot of the time on this program, but today we talk about quite a giant person who has transitioned, and I just wonder if you could take us back to maybe your first interactions with him and what that meant for you and what he's meant for you over the years.
Thanks, Peter, and to my brothers on the panel. Kgafela. I think the most important thing is, for me, I mean, I met Don and Don in the 80s in exile in the UK. So I met him virtually through a book that I got from the library, Gone with the Twilight, which to my astonishment, very few people in this country have actually heard about, and which is not even available at Exclusive Books or any of the popular libraries or bookshops in this country. And it's only, I was just seeing today that it's available on eBay for about 65 British pounds, which is a nice 1,200 rands. So it's not exactly been made accessible, but fortunately for us, we had a vibrant public library, which also had a stash of important African literature, African Caribbean literature, African American literature. And there he was one day staring at me, and everything South African, everything Azanian, everything African, everything that reminded us of home. we consumed voraciously. And fortunately, also from being from a family that is extremely interested in literacy, in literature, in books, in learning, it was this item became almost like this contraband that we circulated within the family, my parents, my sisters, and I couldn't get enough of this idea of this Sophia town that Don was talking about. And I think what is also disappointing and devastating for me is coming home and realizing that the extent to which he made such an impact on our lives, like many others in the diaspora, like many others whose work, whose literature, whose music, whose jazz, whose poetry, whose words were basically a postcard from home. And, I had never set foot in South Africa at that point. This was the 80s. And like many people who are of the generation of the born exiles, basically, he was a lifeline, an umbilical link. And I think, what it also illustrates is the capacity for and the impact that his words, his power, his force, his convictions carried across borders, across oceans, across seas, across languages. And when I eventually had the privilege of meeting him and really becoming a really great father figure, a really great friend, a deep confidant, a supporter, a mentor, somebody who always would send an SMS when he could and say, "You go get him, girl. I saw you on whichever channel. I saw you talking to Peter and Doro. You go get him." And having this conversation with him about this book, Gone with the Twilight, which had such an impact. He was so floored, and he was so humble about the whole thing. And he had such a great humanity, and oftentimes we would have conversations in which he would express his great frustration with the state of this nation, this complex Azania, this complex place, which is indeed a twilight nation, neither here nor there, neither light nor day. And his really deep sense of deep disappointment and almost despair, just this fierce anger, where he would be saying, why is it like this? How could they let us down like this? And for me, it's both. He was both an umbilical cord with home, but later on, of course, also one of the great truth tellers for everything that's happened post 1994 and is still unfolding in complicated, sometimes disappointing, sometimes toxic ways in this South Africa.
All right. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more. I mean, there's so much to unpack, but a question I'm going to ask all of you is how you think we should remember him. And I'm going to start with his sister, actually. And his sister, Janelina, this is how she said she'd like her brother to be remembered as a protector and a gentle soul.
I would like my brother to be remembered as a humanitarian, a soldier who was compassionate towards the people. Growing up with him, I was told by him there's no such a thing as race or color. That is a sick thing. But in the background, seeing my brother coming out, a hero has fallen. This is a man who made time for each and every one on God's planet. He was so compassionate. It was unbelievable. Being raised by him was magic, because he would always sit with you, talk to you, and he would always protect. I want to thank God for my brother this evening. During apartheid, when the illegitimate apartheid government started chasing his children and his kids' sisters, he protected us even through that. And I think that is the biggest thing that any brother can do for his sister and his family. And I want to thank God for every South African, everybody who stopped me in the street and said, "Your brother made a lot of changes in my life." Because it's not only in certain areas, this is an international thing. He is a hero. I can only say tonight that I've never seen anyone like him. Maybe that person will still be born or what, but he was the politician. He was the father of the nation, and he was the humanitarian of his people.
All right. I mean, that's quite a eulogy in a sense that she shared there. And I just wonder, we talk about how should he be remembered. I get it, but I get a sense at the same time that he was many things to many people, as they needed to be for him.
He loved people, Don. I'll share this story. There's another father. Don is one of my fathers. There's another father of mine called Kgafela. He's in Sweden. One day he's performing somewhere in the 80s, and Don is in the crowd. He's busy. Boo-ah, boo-ah, boo-ah. And then after that, Lififi has trouble with his host. Hey man, are you a boa? And then, he had to explain, no, this man was actually supporting. So, but the point is that, that's Don. Wherever he goes, he has this light about him. It's not about him alone. He understands that, other people also have to share this light. And as my sister has said, when you are out there doing something that he thinks, it's uplifting, he will applaud you greatly. He will not hold back, and he will encourage you. And this is the kind of spirit that I felt when I was young. The first time I met him, I was really fumbling, and he said, you can really do this stuff. And, with time, you start believing. And this is the kind of magic that I think the sister is talking about. It was magical just being around him, because lessons with Don Mattera were not just about, okay, I'm teaching you. You travel with him, and, you laugh, and you have all sorts of encounters. One of the greatest encounters, I think, when I began to really understand the man, we were traveling, I think, we're in New York, right? And then we took a bus from New York to go and see Haile Gerima in Washington, D.C. And that's quite a long trip, and I had to be with him. And when Bratzinga is around, you listen. I don't talk as much, So it was just great, just listening to how also he moves within spaces, the way he speaks to people in New York. He meets a different crowd. He talks about this humanity, this compassion. We move, but it's also interesting also because it's quite challenging talking to people. We go to DC, and these people are not interested in hugging white people, right? Singer realizes, hey man, this is a different crowd. So now he knows. I mean, Brazinga, like his name goes, Munapule, it's like water. Any situation, he knows how to flow and fit into that container. If he wants to fit in a container, but he doesn't have to. If he wants, he can spill over. That's the kind of character that you have in Brazinga.
Yeah, and I was actually going to ask Thato that same question, that theme, because you raised it a little bit earlier on. One gets a sense that he had this ability to speak the language that was required to the audience and the people that he was speaking to, so that if he spoke to children, he spoke to them in the way that they needed to hear what he needed to say. It's almost as if he was a universal being that understood things at many, many levels.
Yeah, I listened this morning, and somebody was describing him as eclectic, and I think that is actually an understatement, because you're talking about a larger-than-life character that was very dynamic, as it were. I mean, in his own words, he says that he traded the knife with the pen. In memory is a weapon. He was able to shuttle from gangster to poet. To the Muslims, Brazinga was Omar ad-Din. To the Italians, Brazinga was Francisco. To the Motuana, Brazinga was Munapule. And to the clever in the street, Brazinga was Brazinga. And he was able to employ his word power to diversify himself and link himself to any situation. I mean, in Sophia town, he became, king of a gangster called the Vultures. And it is his command of language, his charisma, that actually put him at the frame of leading such a group. But ultimately, he realized that he had to transform himself into humanism. And as he evolved himself into humanism, he adopted this, phrase of compassion, which everybody uses about him. In his own words, he says compassion is the highest religion, because he had compassion for kids. He had compassion for women. He had compassion for the downtrodden. And importantly, he was concerned in his compassion with the elevation of the human condition. And therefore, poetry was like a glue that he employed in order to articulate his compassion for these various people who were excluded in society that he wanted to affirm.
All right. Again, I'm mindful of time, but there's still so much to discuss. Lebohang, he was a social person as well. You know, there's the parts that we saw, read in the public glare, but he was also very active, literally down on the ground in the communities.
No, he was, I mean, I think first and foremost, other than his words, and as Thato has said, you know, his dexterity between knife and pen, it was also his dexterity and his commitment to movement-based community struggles, which is partly how I began to engage with him when I first came back in the 90s, in fact, as, you know, the Newtown set, the whole poetry set over there, Boshivavas, and all of these other great hangout spots where life was happening, where things were happening, where people were experiencing and expressing the conditions and the realities of what it means to be an African in this South Africa post-1994, and where he never really was a person, he was not the person who walked in looking for a red carpet. In fact, the first time I met him was 1997. I was slightly traumatized because I was like, this can't be that Don Mattera wa Gone with the Twilight, wa Azania and Love. So I was like, it can't be that same, because a lot of people walk in and navigate this world with diva-ish tendencies, because, you know, I have written a book, I've written a poem, I am somebody. And I think his currency was not in who he was in the public domain. He used and utilized and constantly cashed that currency to make a difference to the immediate context. And unlike many others who left, he could have left, possibly he could have become an exile. He chose to become and remain an exile. And I think that it's possibly to his great, it might have actually cost him. I know for a fact it cost him financially. I know that the convictions that he had to, and the commitment, financial commitment, by the way, resource commitment, bread and butter commitment that he had to many people in his community, that soft heart, that compassion, and that Don would do people's grocery, sometimes when he didn't even have food in his own fridge. And I think that even while we eulogize our fallen trees, we also need to appreciate that now and again, we don't water them very well while they are with us. And I think that really it's very unfortunate that we are subjected to, very, very vacuous plastic condolences from people who didn't understand what Thato Don was going through on a day-to-day level, like so many of our legends, like so many of those who are committed to the people of this country. And one might wonder why, but I do think that certainly as a social being, a social actor, he was real. And one thing that Thato Don, he was so authentic. He was so authentic. And I just want to read a poem in case I don't have another chance to talk, because I think it's the best way I can describe him, where he says, the sun has died, wounded and bleeding. The sun has closed its eye and sinking slowly it begins to die. The trees noticed the sad spectacle and lowered their heads as tears of leaf fell from the cheeks of their boughs. Above, birds in solemn flight formed a guard of honor to the dying king. A lark sounded the last post, and the flag of night was lowered as the world covered itself in a black coat of mourning. A star showed the resting place, and crickets chirped in sad repine. The sun has died. The sun had died. The sun has died. But the sun will rise again, and with it shall rise the dreams of men, the hopes of children. For this is a law winter carried out since the beginning of time. I can't think of a better way to really round off Thato Don Mattera.
All right, that's lovely. Thank you so much indeed for sharing that.
I'm the only one who hasn't done a piece, right?
It's a wonderful testimony, that. But I want to get more messages from people around him. Lebohang Mabasa, the president of the Socialist Party of Azania, or SOPA, had this to say about his friend and comrade in arms.
Don believed in black people. He was able to dispel the myth that black people are unable to do anything. In him we saw the fulfillment of who we are. In his poems, he talked directly to ordinary people. He was able to reach the kind of people which the majority of us can't reach. And like she said, he wouldn't compromise. He wouldn't try to be very nice to anybody. He actually worked within the community, and we refer to him as Brazinga, a man of the people, a man who has experienced everything. We looked at Don and said, Don was us, we were Don, and I think that was his strength. He could talk to all kinds of people. He could get into any kind of struggle and never compromised his principles. If he's unhappy about something, he would say so. He laughed and say, you know, Libon, they gave me Inkamanga in silver, and they give each other gold. Because he did believe that he was deserving of recognition, because the whole world has recognized Don. It's only in our country where people struggle to recognize such a great icon. I would say he wasn't only an icon in Eldos, he was actually one of the greatest icons in the whole country. He represented that which we didn't get in 1994. If we say 1994 did not deliver freedom to black people, Don would be able to explain it much better. You know his poem, Sea and Sand, and he would say, God must bless all children, but more the black children who have lost everything, who have lost their land, who have lost literally everything, and they have to build from the ground.
All right, some very definite thoughts about perhaps how he should have been elevated more. We'll converse about that just now, but another close friend of Don was Dr. Ibrahim Harvey, and he had this to say.
Don Mattera was an institution, was one of a kind, and I can tell you one thing, Don Mattera was not sufficiently appreciated in this country. Don and I often spoke about this, and I can tell you now that I've discussed it with Kgalema Motlanthe, a number of ANC people. Had Don been a supporter and member of the ANC, he would have received more recognition than he got. So it was a sore point with Mattera, I can tell you now. It's very unfortunate because, you know, the thing that strikes me about Don, let me tell you, I've never walked with another man or person in town, anywhere you go, and virtually everybody stops him. Almost every, you know, I used to get tired walking with Don in the CBD, yeah. Because you wherever you're going to, you take hours to get there because everybody wants. No, really, a massive contribution this man has made to the struggle in this country, and certainly I would argue at length he was not sufficiently appreciated by the powers that be, unfortunately.
All right, so I'm going to start with you this time, Asi Lebohang. We've heard two speakers there, and they pretty much said the same thing. You know, he got silver, they gave each other gold, and he should have been raised more. And I first had this sense and feeling of sadness when I spoke to Miriam Makeba. And she also gave me the impression that she felt more loved abroad than she did here at home. And I just wonder, what do you think it is that he wasn't as raised as he should have been?
Yeah, and I think I can attest to that, having experienced both Ntate Don and Miriam abroad, that it, again, to my surprise, one comes home, and you don't even hear Miriam's music on the radio. You don't hear it. It's almost as though she was never here. You don't hear Don Mattera's poetry being taught in books as prescribed reading. And I think that it's a many things. I think firstly having frankly an unrevolutionary government which hasn't understood the power of Black epistemology, of Black ontology, and how we have to excavate ourselves with intentionality. We have to teach and write ourselves back into history and her story. And that hasn't been done for the people who were of a different view, that which is away from, the mainstream. And I certainly concur with my good friend and older brother, Dade Laibon Mabaso, in terms of the way that there's been a sectarianism and a political partisanship in how respect, honor, opportunities are distributed amongst our icons, amongst people in this country, and across various sectors. And I think that narrow parochial approach to her story, our story, this story, is possibly going to be our undoing. There needs to be a decolonial reckoning to appreciate that there are multiple and there are pluralities in the way that we experience being Africans in this South Africa, in this so-called South Africa. And I think that really one of the reasons that he was marginalized was absolutely because of his party political convictions, about which he was very explicit, with which, of course, I think many of us on this panel share resonance with those inclinations. And I think there's also it's also to do with the idea that in order to be of a particular, in order to find favor, in order to find recognition, one almost must sell one's political soul, one's ideological soul, one's emotional and spiritual soul in return for some paltry pieces of silver. And I think that it keeps on happening. If it was only Ndate Don, if it was only Miriam, one could say, well, okay, these are just incidences, but it does keep on happening where it seems as though there is a disregard for that which is of our own. There's a disregard of the jewels that we keep in our own repository, and then over recognition and then over celebration of so many more mediocre talents or capacities from other places. And also there's a complete generation gap and a complete generation lapse. And I think I mentioned to you offline, Bra Peter, that I was appalled to see a Twitter debate saying who is the greatest between Lebohang Mathosa and Miriam Makeba and Brenda Fassie. So you can't mention those people in the same breath. You can't. If you have Miriam Makeba in your mouth, Lebohang Mathosa cannot be in your mouth. And I don't care if any Gen Zs want to come after me on Twitter. I'm ready for them. But I do think that it's really such a cultural poverty and a cultural gap. And again, it goes back to this this education system that doesn't prescribe Azanian love song as a prescribed reading, memory as a weapon as a prescribed reading, the storyteller as the prescribed reading, where his poetries are not being taught alongside your Shakespeare's or whoever you are. We should have your Chinua Achebes, your Don Matteras, your Sindiwe Magonas, your Bessie Heads as part of prescribed reading. And our inability or disinterest in rewriting ourselves into a Black African-centered history and her story is partly the reason why these heroes and sheroes become footnotes when we should be building pillars and monuments to them.
All right, okay. I'm going to pick up with you because you're a teacher, and what I'm pretty sure of is that in your classes Don Mattera comes up. But is there perhaps something missing in the wider sphere that maybe his teachings are not rolling off the tongues of everybody as much as others, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, look, I want to start by saying Lebu is absolutely correct. I mean, even if I teach Don Mattera, but this is just me and maybe a few other academics who are interested. I was taught by people like Becky Peterson, and I know that he prescribed a lot of Don Mattera's work, so I wouldn't generalize. But there is a sense in which there's a need to actually expand that, because this is our country, this is an African country. The education need to identify with us, not the other way, so that when we teach, we also use terminology that, is us. I will even go to an extent that we also need to break it down to languages, which is what Ngugi is teaching us, that, we use terms that, are appropriate, because this is what we are trying to do to discover ourselves. And these are the people like Don Mattera really, really are important. And I think it's important to just echo and emphasize the message that, we need to really wake up in this country, because part of the reason why people like Mattera and Miriam Makeba are not celebrated, I mean, it's a very simple way to think about it. One of my friends says, memories of the rulers and memories of the ruled are not the same. And if you understand that, you understand that memorializing projects also are informed by politics, right? So that there's a sense in which certain people have been marked to be silenced, and people like Don Mattera, people like Mzwandile Maqina. I mean, Mzwandile Maqina was one of the greatest, artists in the 70s, a guy who in one day his play would play 3 times and people would be waiting outside, but we hear about other people. So this is just to echo these things. People like Walter Chakela, who, taught us things like Abibi Goro, theories from Ghana, taught us about people like Fua Sutherland, Muhammad Abdallah. We were students under these people, and this is a tradition that we are destroying. So what I'm saying is that even when we remember Brazinga, we need to understand that he was one amongst the many. And when you look at the names that I've mentioned, they have a particular persuasion. And this is the kind of persuasion that I think people disregard, or people just want to silence. I'm the only one who hasn't done a piece, and I think it's important to do that, because talking about the gold and the, and the, I'll put it this way, perhaps. Opopile motuale blanca. Opopile motuale blanca bonka di medi puka di lotsa solanka. O popile motho wa leplanka bonka di medi phuka dilo tsa solanka dinako di apeka tsela e tla iswenka e fatlhile bontsikane ya re raloka ha ile ya potlo e sekaka le botse bo Mattera le bokoka ba ka se letimi go esenka tota re tlhoka go ikheneka bo papala gae go tswa tuka ba tsuba kwa America e bo filwe ke maila khaka maino mo Roma gerika le thola perwe ke molaka ngwana mmukole ka mabadi mo wenka stuka sa swastika a re tla leta merafere ke teka ba rothile makarateka ka mosore lora ka se China ditonki di tla re toloka di a rekeleka dipoko ka tsebe ya rika rikile ra dileleka ba kokotela di sakara di seka ba reka le masika ke phathalatsa zaka ya re tribeka le mela moroka le swaka jeme ya le dronka selo sa iphoshonka seboka dilo di nyoboka ke ropopile motho wa le planka o popile motho wa le planka bonka di medi phuka dilo tsa solanka ba kile ba se boloka ko polokwane se bodu se apoka se tsusitse kereke bile sa ipoka tota re ba lemile sebaka di pizza ba di hijacka di itshulela di khanka go jwa ka di khoka ga mapereko ke teka mahala di atlhami di tranka di atlhami di matrase tsa phalafala di atlhami di matrase tsa phalafala ba paraka tlama e tla ba tlhameka go ronoka bolos matheka ba shaba ka go thweka ba fantisa flaka phasele ha ba tswaka e tswaka e plaka ya go ponoka ha ke sone sna re sa wa tamaraka mo ngwaneng ha sa ka wa temeka di panolotse di ipitika ntja tsa stock o popile motho wa le blanka ke ro popile motho wa le blanka bonka di medi phuka dilo tsa solanka la ikaletsa ka go politika mafofora magakabe a haraka moruo wa Afrika.
We are deeply, deeply enriched today. Thank you so much indeed for that. Thato, I just to close off this portion of this conversation, I'm just wondering, could it have been that Bradon himself didn't go out looking for accolades, as some might do, and that maybe that's why he isn't as celebrated as much as it should have been?
Kgafela teaches us that until lions become historians, tales of hunting will always continue to glorify the hunters. I suppose in this dispensation, Don is not a hunter, but the hunted. Hunted because he is not a person who was afraid to speak truth to power at all material times, from the apartheid dispensation, even in the democratic dispensation. So a lot of people, when they're in power, are not comfortable with people who speak truth to the hegemony they hold. I think that's the first point. And therefore, the celebration or lack of celebration of Don Mattera, in my view, comes from that vintage point. Having said that, I think there's an important point to make, that there can't be an excuse for those of us who are still freedom fighters in this dispensation to insist on, iconizing Don Mattera in our various pockets of life. In, for instance, the gender studies of this country, people don't know that Don Mattera was actually a gender activist himself. I have an extract in The Art of Witty in which he talks about the importance of women in our society. He says that if you are involved in an argument in Sophia Town and there's a need to vouch or strike an oath about the truthfulness of what you're saying to escape a situation, just the mere mention of your mother, the old lady di Mamtana di Magriza, would actually prove to everyone else in the society that we have that you are indeed telling the truth. And that's Don Mattera for you, who teaches us the centrality of the women folk in our society. And I think if you can't, in our gender studies, as feminists, pick up Don Mattera and the kind of conversations you'd have on engendering agenda, you've missed the point. I'm saying in the different pockets of our teachings where we are, let us play our part to iconize Don Mattera the way we should, and not allow anybody, whether it is the ruling class or the hunters, to define Don Mattera for us. Lastly, let me conclude with See and Send and say that he says, "See and send, my love, my land, God bless Africa. Bless the angry mountains and the smiling hills where the cool water spills to heal the earth's brow. See and send, my love, my land, God bless Africa. Bless the South where we live. Bless the black children and the black children and the white children, but more the black children, that they may not lose love for the white children whose fathers raped the land. See and send, my love, my land, God bless Africa." That was Obrazinga, and I think this is a man we dare not forget, because he lives with us, he is us, and we should keep on with his legacy until the end of time. Thank you very much.
All right. You know what? There were other voices that I wanted us to hear, but we're running out of time. So I think we should start wrapping up. And I'll start with you, Lebohang, and I just want you to perhaps leave us with what you think the life of Don Mattera, what was the most important message for society and us to take from his life?
There are myriad, but I think I'd like to sort of hover around the notion of memory and memorialization, because I think the lesson is that unless we are able and willing to write our own lexicons and create our own repositories, we will then become obscured and become strangers and footnotes in our own iconography, in fact, and we will become basically forgotten and unremembered. In fact, because being forgotten is not the same as being unremembered. Unremembered is the deliberate and complicit erasure of our footsteps, of our voices, of the fact that we were ever here, in a way that also Ntate Sobukwe's voice is unremembered and erased, and yet we know that he was here. And I think that the other piece of that is always to be rooted in some kind of communitarianism, continue to be in whichever form, in whichever dimension, whether it's in the arts, whether it's in academia, whether it's as a political economist like myself, but in whatever form, I do think that he reminds us that our struggles, our work, our ethos must always be grounded in a sincere and authentic love of people, love of Africa, love of the Azanian cause. And lastly, I think that it's also important to continue to respect and honor eldership and respect and honor those who have gone before us and those who remain with us now. And I do think that, I do hope that we break this unfortunate habit of loving people and remembering them when they are gone. And I think that as a nation, as people, we can do better. And I think that as South Africa, I would like to challenge us, I'd like to challenge the powers that be to be thoughtful, to be effective, to be intentional in memorializing people whilst they live, and of course in remember and sustaining them physically, emotionally, financially, and with resources whilst they are alive, but also to remember them as, you know, and honor them in the hereafter. And that is my greatest wish for Dr. Don and for the many fallen trees like him of a particular generation. He is one of the last of a generation of people who we will never see the likes of again, who are a link between the past and the present. And I hope that as we, as the vanguard, are able to hold that baton with honor and with dignity and with the kind of selfless valor that he personified and exemplified all the days of his life. Thank you.
All right, Elsie Lebohang, thank you very much indeed. Thato, 1 minute for you.
Yeah, I think you are limiting, but it's fine. You know, I think Don Mattera should be remembered as a great humanist who was able to shuttle between socialism, Pan-Africanism, and advocate of blank consciousness that we should learn from, because he was an advocate of all of those important human elevating ideologies, both in theory and practice. You know, today we've got a problem of people who just academicize their beliefs and they don't, find expression through practice. Don Mattera is an embodiment of a person who could, combine the two. And I think this is what the new generation has to importantly learn from Don Mattera, because he was not just theoretical about what he spoke about. He taught us in deeds that which he, articulated in words, which words, of course, was vehicled through his poetry.
Thank you so much. And 55 seconds for you.
I'll try and be quick, right? There's lightning. Don Mattera, I'm reminded of the story of Malcolm X. For me, I always try to do a comparative reading of the two. Both of them start as, clevers in the streets and, what they call hoodlums in the US. And boom, life happens, you are young, you find yourself in prison. They convert into Islam and they find this path into, the spoken word. And this is the thing that I love about this comparison, is that it's possible for anyone to rise from this, from the doldrums, as it were, so that you look at figures like Malcolm X and Don Mattera, how they've inspired a whole lot of us with, with knowledge of the streets as well, because sometimes we think that knowledge is something that you pick up in and I'm speaking also as a person who's in the university, but I know that a lot of the language and knowledge, you pick it up from the streets, as it were. And Don Mattera exemplifies this thing. When you think about Malcolm X, Marimba Ani described Malcolm X as a person with the power of Nomo, which is the power of the word, that through the word he could raise your vibrations and you could fly if you wanted to.
All right, and that's where we'll leave it to the three of you. Thank you so much indeed for helping us remember this great man. And as he lives on in spirit and in another form, we continue to celebrate, and his legacy perhaps to be picked up and carried on by the likes of you and us, so that the next generations will learn from his life. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you.
Ola.
Thank you. All right, and that's where we leave this conversation for the time being. But go out, get his books, read his poems, and learn. He had so much to say and so much to teach. All right, stay with us. You're watching The Globe.